Right, lovely. Hello, everyone. Now, where are we? 5:30. Good evening. Welcome to Stowe Talks. Now, tonight's session, I'm very excited about it. Tonight's session is about finding the unexpected joy of heartbreak. I'm a divorce lawyer, and I've been a divorce lawyer for an awfully long time, so I am a fish out of water a little bit with this subject, which is part of the reason I'm so excited about it. And you may well feel that tonight's topic is a departure from the norm, and you'd be right, obviously. We're not taking a deep dive into a family law issue. Instead, we're talking about breakups. Yes, there's a tenuous link. Frequently, it's a breakup that means that you may need a family lawyer in your life. But tonight, we're focusing on how we can sometimes turn a breakup into an opportunity. And that's an opportunity for healing. It's an opportunity for learning and for growth. Okay. So tonight, our guest is Rosie Wilby. Hello, Rosie. Welcome. Rosie is an award-winning comedian. She's an author. She's a speaker, and she's a creator of the global hit podcast and also the book by the same name, the Breakup Monologues. Now, if you know Rosie already, you will be aware that she appears on Radio 4. You may have seen her on the TV. You may have heard her on other podcasts, such as the Guilty Feminist, which I know quite a few people and a few of my team are big fans of. Now, the Breakup Monologues isn't her first book, and I'm really hoping that she's got a lot more in the pipeline, which is good. But I'm really taken with the podcast. I was nearly late tonight, actually, because I was too busy listening to Rosie on a podcast, which is a bit weird. But it was the podcast with Ed Byrne from the 11th of August. So if anyone wants to do a quick search, find that really good. I really recommend it. I don't know how Rosie manages to kind of get people so relaxed and to talk about such a difficult subject. So I don't know, with so much honesty or with such ease. Yes, he's a professional and he talks for a living, so maybe that helps. I don't know, but I was really impressed. I could learn an awful lot there, I think. So where am I going? I'm going off piste again, aren't I? Now, tonight's session I'm hoping will be uplifting. I'm hoping it's going to be more heartwarming. Now, like I said, we do relish bringing you the harder aspects of family law, but tonight's session should bring you some joy. Breakups are anxious times. They are difficult. We're not ignoring that. Absolutely not. But as I say, tonight should be a bit more heartwarming. Now, I have to do some housekeeping because I always have to do some housekeeping. Now, welcome to new listeners. Welcome. If you're Rosie fans, I bet you weren't expecting to come to a webinar tonight with a divorce practice, but hey ho. And welcome back to old friends. It's likely you've registered for this because you've got an interest in the subject. Now, you could be someone with a personal experience of a recent breakup. You might be a family member of someone who's had a breakup and you're trying to help them. You might be a counsellor. You might be a lawyer wanting to learn more. You might even be a law student. Best of luck. We welcome you in whatever capacity you are here in, as always. We are recording tonight's session and details will be made available. There's always the ability to ask questions. We do like questions. So the Q&A function is activated on here. So bob your question in the Q&A bit, but it's also a safe space for people to listen and make comments. Obviously be respectful to each other. You always are, but I have to say that. Use the chat function, okay? Feel free to use that. Questions in the Q&A, chat in the chat box, okay? Lastly, my housekeeping point is we do these webinars. The content is driven by yourselves very much. So let us have feedback. Let us know what you want. I appreciate that if you're here mostly for Rosie and a slightly more cheerful element of relationship breakdown recovery, then you may not want to listen to perhaps some of the more gritty topics we listen to. But if there's something you don't know about, or there's something we might have covered 18 months ago or something, we can always go around again. Not a problem. So just let us know. And on that note, you've heard too much of me. Rosie, over to you. Welcome.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that introduction. It's lovely to be here and be doing something a little bit different to a heckly Friday night comedy club in front of lots of drunk people, but I suppose you never know. So yes, I am Rosie Wilby. I am a comedian and podcaster and author, as you mentioned, of this book, The Breakup Monologues. That's the paperback. This is the brightly coloured hardback version. And yes, how have I ended up coming to become the queen of breakups, as I sometimes get nicknamed? As you mentioned, it is also a podcast, and I interview fellow comedians, authors, interesting people, sometimes some of the scientists who are looking at the real processes that go on in our brains when we are literally withdrawing from a partner that we have become chemically addicted to, and what's going on, and why do those chemicals and the lack of them make us feel so very, very terrible. A little bit of a note about language. You mentioned obviously you're a legal practice, and I talk primarily about breakups. I tend to use that term because I think it's a more inclusive term than particularly divorce, because I'm a gay woman and I haven't had access legally to marriage for much of my dating life. It might actually be a good thing in the end, because I'd probably had as many divorces as Joan Collins. But obviously the legal process does add an extra layer to what you'll be going through, what many of the people you might be working with will be going through. But I tend to think that the psychological process, the emotional process that we go through after any type of significant breakup is largely the same, that very emotional journey that we go on. And I started to document my own journey in my comedy shows, and I have been looking at how we can use humour to help us along on this journey. And I realised that once I started talking about my big breakup that happened many years ago now, I did start to feel better about it, perhaps because the audience were responding, they were hearing me, and they were coming up and telling me their stories and saying, yes, I've been in that place, I've had that same experience. And I think if we start to feel that we're not alone and we're part of a community, and actually everyone has been through this at some stage, we do start to feel a little bit better. And the first joke I wrote about my big breakup was when I got dumped by email, which I thought was, yes, I know, I can see you responding, Sarah, but I thought it was a little bit rude after a 5-year partnership. But I did cheer myself up a little bit at the time by telling myself I did feel much better once I'd corrected her spelling and and punctuation and changed the font. Breakup in wingdings is far preferable, I think you'll find. And yeah, as I say, I started to realise that talking in a humorous way around the breakup and finding some of the sometimes quite dark humour in what I was going through did start to help me along in my process. And so that's eventually led me to the podcast, where other people come and tell sometimes very funny stories about some of the things that they've got up to in the extremes of heartbreak, in those extreme times of emotion. There's this saying, isn't there, tragedy plus time equals comedy. That was actually the title of Ed Burns' recent show. He was actually thinking about other types of loss and bereavement, but I think there are lots of ways in which a big breakup and a bereavement are incredibly similar in the way that we then go about recovery. But thinking back to the breakup by email, I did think it was maybe quite polite ultimately, if you think about the context of our contemporary dating landscape, where we have all these new behaviours like ghosting. I don't know whether people know what that is. I think a lot of people do now. It's where somebody just completely disappears and stops messaging you back, and you don't really know what's happened at all. There is a chapter in the book actually called "I Thought I'd Been Ghosted, but He'd Just Gone to Prison." And so there is this whole new lexicon of breakups, this whole new language about these new behaviours, many of which are not particularly ethical. And what I do in the book is I decode some of these behaviours. One of my favourite variants on ghosting is Marleying, where you do ghost someone, but you pop up again at Christmas. And I did start to, it's great actually seeing you laugh silently. It's so different to my normal comedy gigs. But what I wanted to share with you is I also talked about the new lexicon of breakups on a BBC podcast called The Boring Talks. And I was told that my talk might actually be too interesting to be included in The Boring Talks. But I did just sneak in there. And what's great about being on that podcast is that a fabulous illustrator called Jack does these wonderful illustrations of your talk. And so it was brilliant to see what he made of my little podcast about the lexicon of breakups. And if anyone does want to have a copy of this afterwards, do contact me or drop me a line on social media, and I'm happy to share it with you, because it is quite fun. And I think it does say a lot about the new sort of digital landscape of dating, and also the very bewildering landscape that many people who are newly separated, newly divorced, and have just emerged from long-term partnerships suddenly find themselves in. It's this very unfamiliar world of Tinder and ghosting and goodness knows what. Or just noticed someone says they would like a copy. Yes, that I'm sure we can sort that out, no problem, after the session. I wanted to talk through some of these little bits over on the right-hand side. It says, what does all this language mean? Is it just a way of turning romance into a game? And a lot of dating experts will talk about the gamification of love, and how, to some extent, the more we keep swiping right on people, we're starting to think of people as characters in a game, and maybe it is encouraging less ethical behaviours and not thinking about one another as humans with emotions. And as a general rule, I tend to think we should think about how it would feel to be on the receiving end of a particular type of behaviour. I know that there was a comedian once who did a survey of his audience and said, you know, hands up if you've ever ghosted anyone, and then hands up if you'd like to be ghosted by somebody, and of course far less hands go up. So that's a pretty good general rule, I think. And the code of conduct for these new sort of platforms hasn't really been written yet. So we're perhaps feeling our way with how we can behave on these platforms. There's also, in the bottom right-hand corner of the picture, a relationship escalator, which is a term for the sort of societal pressure that we feel to move very rapidly through the different stages of a relationship. And I do think it's interesting how culturally we seem to celebrate relationship longevity over anything else. And I think we should really ditch those ideas. You know, it's nice that relationships are celebrated as they go on a long time, and wedding anniversaries are celebrated with these ascending hierarchies of gifts, from sort of lowly wood and paper to gold and rubies and diamonds. But what if you only stay together a couple of years? It's not a terrible failure. Maybe it's a wonderful success if you manage to separate really amicably. So I think we need to get rid of some of these ideas about these binaries of success and failure, and goodies and baddies, and heroes and villains, and sort of winning the breakup or losing the breakup. I like to think of conscious uncoupling and separating more amicably, and how we can maintain a sense of family. And if you're looking at ways of doing that, I would say this, but I think the LGBT community have historically been really good at pioneering concepts around sort of kind breakups. And I believe that we pioneered conscious uncoupling long before Gwyneth Paltrow broke the internet with it, because in smaller communities you do tend to have to stay friends because, well, I always say you've got to be nice to your ex's 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 ex, because that might actually be you. So I'm going to stop sharing that now, but if anyone does want a copy, that's of course no problem. Now I wanted to talk for a little bit also about the subtitle of the book, which is the Unexpected Joy of Heartbreak. And a lot of people say to me, what are you talking about, Rosie? There's no joy in heartbreak. What can you possibly mean? But through all this looking at breakups with wonderfully funny and inspiring and wonderful guests, I have come to really love breakups and embrace them as an opportunity for personal growth, for reflection, for thinking about what we do want as well as what we don't want. I think breakups can really help us get to know ourselves once we've sort of come through the other side, and once the dust has settled. I've heard so many stories, particularly from women who've embarked on new careers, found ways of starting that business, going traveling, making new friends, meeting new partners, and actually finding themselves, discovering themselves in a whole new way, sometimes having a sexual reawakening as well. And I've heard some very funny stories from people who've just started dating again, actually, the wonderful Scummy Mummies podcast to Helen Thorne has a wonderful story about sending an intimate photograph to one of her neighbours by accident. So I think it can be this really roller coaster time, but there can be highs as well as the lows. And I do think that this ending can also be a new beginning of something. So for that reason, I did write the first half of my book in a sort of backwards timeline and the second half in a forwards timeline. So it's a bit like one of those butterfly paintings you kind of smoosh together as a child, and you get this weird kind of symmetry where maybe you're moving forwards with, you know, your opinions and your views being coloured by the past in some way. And we do have this lovely illustration of a butterfly in the book as well, to sort of think about this idea that beginnings are also endings of something. And I do believe that even when we're in a relationship, we should really celebrate our past breakups, losses, separations, and we can then, I think, use that information to keep thinking about how we grow, how we reflect, how we communicate in a relationship, how we behave in a way that might be more conducive to healthy relationships than how we were in the past. And so that's very much what I look at in the book. And I'm going to read a short extract where we are introduced to my partner, girlfriend, she's called in the book. She's now my wife. So hopefully some of this psychology I've been able to put to good use. I think you can probably see one of our wedding photos in the background there. So yes, but I'm just going to read a little bit, which gives a flavour of why I still like to celebrate breakups. We're driving to a festival in girlfriend's midlife crisis car, an electric blue BMW convertible. Although the way she drives makes me wonder if you can still describe it as a midlife crisis if it ends up killing us. That would be an end-of-life crisis, and quite a crisis at that. Never mind, the sun is shining, our life is good. We have a fancy loft conversion. We go on ski holidays. We Google things like, can dog eat mange too? After 2 decades of scratching out a creative existence from gig to gig, first as a wistful indie songwriter and then as a willfully grassrootsy comedian, I now get to live like a wanker because my libido went all aspirational on me and drew me to a partner with an actual job. However, 3 months shy of our 3-year anniversary, things have got real. Girlfriend and I have reached a refreshing level of frankness about the fact that our mutual desire has waned. We have teetered and toppled over the parapet of honeymoon bliss and fallen to the ground below, stirred from the anaesthetising effects of the sexy brain chemicals that have propelled us along thus far with relative ease. Suddenly, we're acutely aware of the careers and friends we have neglected during the happy haze. We have reached the stage where being in a relationship with a fellow human has become a massive pain in the arse. Even though it's a largely excellent relationship that neither of us intends to leave. Repeat, we're not going to break up, not for the foreseeable, not us. In fact, it's the first time I've reached this point and not been planning a daring, dramatic escape. Counting up significant partners who I probably would have married if it had been legally available to me all along, I'm now on to my 5th wife. That puts me on a multi-marriage par with Joan Collins. But I'm done with twisting. I think I'd like to stick. I found a funny, sexy, generous partner, even if she does have a ridiculous knobby car. Surely if I left this one, I'd be breaking up with love altogether. It would be my end game. And it's from this position of at least wanting to stay, of accepting the maddening claustrophobia of companionship, that I want to investigate why breakups continue to compel me so much. Perhaps it's because breakups facilitate and maybe even necessitate transformation. In the wake of a separation, our peers allow us to reinvent ourselves. The rest of the time, they like us to stay fixed so they can move around and ahead of us. But heartbreak is the golden ticket that circumvents this bullshit. Renewed and reborn, standing at the edge of the echoing canyon of our former frustrations, we shout, "This is who I am now." And we run and skip away from the parched carcasses of the old selves that we've grown to hate. For me, it's been during these fleeting, liberating gaps of singledom that I've really got things done. I recorded and released an album. I launched a boutique music PR company. I started comedy. I wrote a book. Each time I harnessed any lingering feelings of anger, sadness, and confusion and used them as energizing forces for creativity, for moving forwards with new insights into my own shortcomings and foibles. I wonder, is it possible to do that much learning and actively stay in a relationship? I hope so. It must be, right? Or else all long-term couples would be codependent, emotionally stunted weirdos. Oh, hang on. That's a little extract from the book. Oh, someone saying they've just ordered it. Thank you so much. I really hope you enjoy it. So I also want to chat a little bit about my first book and the themes that I explored in that, because that was called Is Monogamy Dead? And I do think that issues around sex and fidelity often are the number one cause of breakups. It's a really complex area. You know, our sexual desires are really, you know, are off the scale at the start of a relationship, but that changes as we get further into a partnership. And because we live in a very sexualized society, we can often think that something is wrong. And I thought that something was wrong in my relationship that I was in at the time I wrote this book. And that's why I was quite interested to investigate this whole topic. And the book was actually inspired when I heard that in many surveys, around 50% of people confess to cheating. And that got me thinking, if you are in a monogamous relationship and you're not cheating, then look closely at your partner. Simple, that says it's got to be them. No, I'm sure it's not you. I'm sure it's not your partners or anyone here that's listening. I'm sure we're the exceptions to the rule. Don't worry too much. But I also was really interested to find that some of my friends were investigating having open partnerships or ethical non-monogamy, ENM, as some people refer to it, and they were discussing having more than one partner. What I quite like here is there's a whole new language emerging around these new types of relationship, new forms of relationship. And if you're polyamorous, having many loves as opposed to monogamous, monogamy comes from the Greek monos gamos, one marriage for life rather. I think many of us now mean one marriage at a time, don't we? We're sort of more serial monogamists, and maybe that makes sense as we live much longer lives. You know, these sort of primitive brain structures we have around and processes we have around fidelity and sex were not really designed for us living such a long time. So it's complicated being a human being, I think. And so there is this whole new language around new forms of relationships. And if you are polyamorous, having many loves, and you feel you've reached your threshold of partners, you can say that you're polysaturated. And I do think that this is maybe a healthier, more positive, more fun type of language, maybe than the new language around breakups like ghosting and breadcrumbing and submarining, which all describe maybe not so ethical behaviours, but these sort of new terms in the world of polyamory, I really like, because it maybe makes us think about how in our English language, we just have one word for love, which means all these different things. Like the Greeks had all these different words for erotic love, family love, and brotherly love, and all these different types of love. So I think we do sort of overburden particular words, and it is quite fun perhaps to think about inventing new language, particularly if it's looking at doing things in an ethical and kind way, which largely speaking, people who are opening up their relationships trying to do. Obviously, there are always people doing things in less ethical ways too. I've had some turn up to some of my gigs where I sort of had a man with two girlfriends who neither of them spoke, and I wasn't sure about that scenario, but largely speaking, a lot of people who are having these very open and frank discussions, I think are doing things in a sort of ethical and kind of way. Now, this book followed another comedy show of mine, and I'm quickly going to share another picture where I whizzed through some of the history of sex research over the past few decades, including the work of these two. I don't know if anyone knows who these two are. You could quickly post in the chat if you know who it is, but I'll tell you. I don't think anyone has posted, but it is Masters and Johnson, who were a American sex research couple. They eventually got married because you're working together gave them the horn. Well, there was quite a fun TV show that was made about them called Masters of Sex. And amongst many discoveries that they made, they were among the first people to tell us that for a woman to have an orgasm, a penis was not necessary. A discovery that I think she looks slightly happier about than him in this particular photograph. But just a bit of fun there. And it does sort of lead me on to thinking about female sexuality and how I was really interested in how there are a lot of cultural myths around women within sort of patriarchal society, and around how we sort of assume that women are the sort of the monogamous ones, the faithful ones. And there's a lot of studies that have been done more recently. I've taken part in some of them, actually, where you go and sit in this sort of little booth watching erotic images and you're having your arousal measured. I do talk about this in the book. You can read about it. The weird thing is that the clip they show you in between the erotic images to sort of calm you down, the control clip, is a David Attenborough documentary. But these experiments have sort of shown that women do have a sort of thirst for sexual novelty just as much as men do, and that we don't really want to listen to the sort of patriarchal messaging that we've had, that women sort of don't have sexual desires, don't crave novelty. There is evidence that maybe we do even more so than men. And I found this really interesting because I was particularly fascinated when I started to see data emerging as we started to get civil partnerships and then obviously same-sex marriage. And you do see lesbian partnerships breaking up at many, many times the rate of gay male partnerships. And that really surprised me. And it may not surprise some of the people on this call, because you'll probably know, working in divorce, that the vast majority of divorces are initiated by the woman. Now, of course, there could be all kinds of reasons for that. It could be that men are behaving badly and women are getting fed up with it. But it could also be that these structures of marriage and monogamy have sort of been forged in patriarchal interest, in male interest, and perhaps they do feel more oppressive to women. And there's perhaps a real feminist argument for why women are initiating more separations than men. But I wanted to sort of come to a bit of a close of my section before we open up for a bit of a discussion, because I can see some comments coming in and there usually are lots of things to say around these topics. But I just wanted to, for a bit of fun, read a little bit from the first book, where I am looking at sort of reconnecting with my sexuality in a partnership that, like I say, had become less sexual. And I think in the society we live in, we start to think that means something is wrong. Maybe we need to separate. Maybe we need to break up. And so I'm just going to, I'm sure you weren't expecting this at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday evening, but I'm going to talk a little bit about my research trip. Let's say it was research to the lesbian sauna. It's not too raunchy, I promise. I'd been too much of a monogamous prude to realise, but lesbians are sometimes allowed to have casual sex, once every 2 months apparently, because that's how frequently the Locker Room, a gay sauna just off South London's leafy and affluent Cleaver Square, is hijacked by the women. Now that I was writing a show on sex infidelity, I could visit under the comforting guise of research. I'd been told tales of wild excess about what went on there, behind the clouds of steam and sweat, by gay male friends. Would women behave with similar animalistic abandon? I heard about the sporadic women's event through my friend Belle, who described herself as solo poly and explained this as engaging in multiple ethically non-exclusive relationships while abandoning the hierarchical structure of a primary relationship. Although she cared very much for her lovers and friends, her key commitment was to herself and her own path. To remind herself of this, she wore a single wedding ring around her neck on a chain. Belle and I agreed not to cramp one another's style. I would leave her to her own devices or vices. Yet, if I was in any way uncomfortable, I was to go and discreetly belch in her ear. It was the most ridiculous safe word ever. I wasn't even sure I could belch on demand. Yet she'd once heard of a friend and his wife using it as a code, and the idea had tickled her enough to copy it. An amiable, bespectacled butch who seemed to be in charge proposed an icebreaker game in the cramped bar upstairs. Even though most of us were still clothed and sipping milky tea from polystyrene cups, there was a giggly frisson, the airless space rich with pheromones. The butch clapped her hands like a PE mistress rounding up her girls and explained, "We must speak to the person next to us." Then, when she rang a little bell, switch our attention to somebody else. I inquired if the bell system would be employed later on, encouraging us to rotate partner later on. This got a big laugh. I could have happily gone home then. But then a slender-toned woman a few years my senior strutted over. "I'm Helen," she purred, fluttering eyelashes thick with mascara, browny greying curls cascading round long earrings, droplets of silver pointing down to her glistening neck and chest. "Rosie," I stared instinctively, offering a handshake, a formal and robust greeting to legitimise what might follow. "What do you want to do tonight?" Oh God, I hadn't prepared for this question. I thought to myself, I wouldn't mind an intelligent discussion on Britain's role in the European Union. Instead, I gulped. I looked over at Belle and wondered if I could employ our code this early into the evening. A fear gripped me I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. A mum's friend had once asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. How can you answer? How does anyone know? This was the same. If I say spanking, just for the hell of it, she might say, "I'm into that, let's go." I might have to go through with it just out of politeness. Fortunately, the bell rang. A pretty Asian femme, barely half my age, whirled round to catch my eye, long painted fingernails giving her sexual tourism away. "You look like a film star," she proclaimed. "Thanks," I said. "Which one?" "I don't know." She laughed. This was immediately more comfortable to me than the first situation with Helen. This girl clearly had no idea what she was doing, which meant I wouldn't be exposed as not knowing what I was doing either. Once we descended to the steamy, dimly lit basement, a blonde woman started nonchalantly flicking through a magazine. A strange mix of aloof and slutty, she pulled down her bikini to rest under her breasts. Then, in a moment of OCD, started folding towels and tidying. This was hardly the hedonistic gangbang I'd anticipated. Imagine reporting back to my friend, the one person I'd told where I was in case I died. "What happened?" he'd say. "Nothing," I'd say. But then the Asian girl leaned forward from the bench above and whispered, "Let's do something." Silently, I took her hand and led her out to the shower. After being in the cosy cocoon of the sauna, however, emerging into the drafty corridor felt like stepping into a blizzard. How do gay men cope with this temperature change? We turned on the shower and tried to kiss under its dribbly warmth, but it was on a timer. The water kept stopping. "Let's go to the steam room," she suggested, not to be defeated. Well, the steam room was insanely hot, like climbing inside a kettle. There's no way I'd be able to stay in there long enough to make a woman orgasm. We started kissing awkwardly, like kids playing spin the bottle. Then, as the steam parted, I saw a familiar face. I tried to concentrate, but kept looking over. Who is that? Then I remembered. Oh God, she's a regular at my gigs who often tweets me afterwards with not entirely welcome feedback. I imagined her judging me this time, holding up a scorecard. "Hi, Rosie." "Hi," I blurted, sitting upright. And we all started chatting, as women do, and then went upstairs for another cup of milky tea. So that is a fun little extract. I hope it wasn't too racy and shocking on a Wednesday evening. But before we open up for questions, I just wanted to say, please do keep in touch with me on Twitter at Rosie Wilby, on Instagram at Breakup Monologues, and do check the book out. I'd absolutely love it if you would. If you want to buy the paperback, the Kindle, or the audiobook version, they're all available on Amazon. But I have found out that Amazon are running out of the hardback copies. So if you want a hardback copy, do contact me directly, because I've got a few here that I can sell to you slightly cheaper, especially special deal for people who've been on this session, and I can personalize it and send a personal cheeky little message to you as well. So yeah, I'd love it if you did want to check out the book, or indeed have a listen to the podcast. But thank you so much. I know some people are saying that thanks for making me giggle, so I hope it was something a little bit different. But I think we're going to have a bit of a Q&A and a bit of a chat now.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just getting over the lesbian sauna story. No one's ever said anything like that on a family law webinar before, Rosie, but thank you very much for that. I loved it. I really loved it.
You know, I like to make things a bit different for everyone.
I absolutely love it. Now, we have a question in the Q&A, which may well kind of kickstart some conversations around this area. But someone, I presume, may have had a breakup recently, and they're saying, "I feel like I never want to live with a man again. Is this normal?"
Well, as a lesbian, I'd say that sounds very normal. No, no. I think, you know, I know many people of all genders and sexualities who immediately after a breakup, and maybe for some time after a breakup, you know, there's no sort of timeline to this. I hate this idea somehow of proportionality, that it takes you know, a length of time somehow proportional to the length of time of the relationship. It takes you whatever sweet time you need, really. So I've heard so many people say they're done with relationships, they never want to be with anyone again, and never want to live with anyone again. Obviously, living together brings a whole host of negotiations about dividing up chores. You know, myself and my wife, you know, we can fall out about housework and about shopping and cooking and cleaning and stuff around the house. I mean, I do sort of make sure that in the book, I do sort of have a realistic representation of some of that bickering that is quite normal and natural and does go on. And I think obviously it can be a whole lot more complicated when you have children. My wife and I, we have pets. They're our babies. We have a dog and a cat, and they feature quite strongly in the book. And we talk a little bit in the book about sort of pet custody and that sort of aspect as well. But yeah, there's so much more to do around the house if you have children too. So we often see examples where the woman is doing way more than the man, even if the man thinks he's doing his equal share. So I can well understand feeling very burned by your experience, but I do think that time and communication and hopefully a little bit of humour and laughter, lots of fun activities that you love doing, dancing, singing, exercise, moving around, go to some comedy, come and see one of my shows. I'd love to see you there. You know, I hope that all of those things can help put you in a place where you rebuild your relationship with yourself first and foremost, and then sort of rebuild your trust in others. And it can take as long as you want it to take. Obviously, you may want to see a therapist, or you know, see a professional who can you can explore some of your sort of anger and resentment and fears and hurt with, because we feel the sort of deluge of feelings, don't we? There's a bit in the book where I write about I went to a performance workshop where we had to sort of visually convey the topic that we were writing about, and I couldn't quite think how to, because I'm very wordy, I'm a writer, I couldn't think about how to visually portray a breakup. And she said, you've got to use, I'm going to go out the room for 2 minutes, you've got to use something you can find in this room. And I found an envelope of her old photographs. It was quite old school, actually, that when you used to get photographs developed and you get them in a little packet from Snappy Snaps. And they were all sort of happy, smiling images of her, of this performance artist friend who was leading the workshop, of her at various parties with friends, out and about doing fun things. And so what I did is I just lay on the floor and scattered the photos all over me, like I was sort of completely suffocated and submerged in a sort of avalanche of memories, because I think that's how it can feel, particularly in this modern era where Facebook is always popping up with memories. And I think we can overly romanticize and become over nostalgic about the past, and we do need to also remember the things that didn't work about the relationship. It's sort of a negative reappraisal strategy, which is often used with alcoholics and addicts, and so many parallels have been found between treatments for alcoholics and addicts and people who are recovering from a breakup. So I wish you all the best with your healing journey, but I'm sure that things will change and you will feel more able to have a relationship if you choose so in the future.
I love that answer. That was great. That's really encouraging as well. I think one of the things I've found working as a divorce lawyer is the speed at which the different sexes move on. And frequently straight men move on really quickly, and it can compound the heartbreak. It really can. So I have been known to warn female clients that this is something that might happen.
Yes,
somehow in the process.
It's interesting though. There is some research, some data that shows that reported pain after a breakup is more for women in the immediate aftermath of the breakup, but actually more for men in the longer term. Perhaps men are less able to process things quickly. Maybe they do move on very quickly, but then perhaps much further down the line realise there's still a lot of emotional pain. Oh, there's your dog having a word.
That's the beagle howl, actually. So clearly he's got strong thoughts on the matter. Maybe he thinks we're doing him a disservice somehow. Back to the job in hand. Okay, so polygamy, we've got an interesting comment about how obviously we've moved forward massively. But legally you can't marry two partners. Now, I don't really have a view on that. I don't see that the law is going to be changing anytime soon. There's nothing even in the pipeline for the Law Commission that I'm aware of. But any thoughts or comments that you've come across in your research?
Well, I mean, I think what's really interesting is when we in the Western world talk about monogamy and polyamory, we are putting our own lens on it, and there have been historically and still are some parts of the world where, you know, multiple marriage would be legal, and sometimes it not necessarily. We tend to think that's men marrying multiple wives. There are even a few parts of the world, or have been historically, where women can marry multiple men. That's polyandry, as opposed to polygyny. So yeah, you know, it's interesting that the lens we sort of put on these things. But I guess speaking as a gay woman, where I've kind of always thought a bit outside the box about relationships because of that, because I came out when I was a teenager, and after dating boys briefly, I, you know, realized that I was attracted to girls. I suppose I haven't always thought of marriage as the be all and end all. I mean, I'm married now, but I do think that you don't have to get married for a relationship to be a really significant one. Obviously, we have civil partnerships as well now, and I was glad when heterosexual people were able to access that too, because I have a few friends who didn't want sort of some of the baggage that's associated with marriage and wanted the option to have a civil partnership, although they're almost the same, really, aren't they? It is really more of a sort of cultural understanding of the two different terms. But yeah, I don't necessarily think that we need to see a change in the law, but I think it's a change in our conversations, in the way we think about relationships and love. And I think what's been interesting to me is that I'm still monogamous. You know, my wife and I, we have an exclusive sexual relationship, but I think it's been quite informed by all this research that I've done and all the people that I've spoken to, and we have very open and frank discussions about if we do fancy other people, for example, if we're attracted to other people, because that's quite normal and natural, and sometimes it can be a little bit threatening, and you don't want to be too brutal if you talk about such things, but it can be quite fun to talk about, you know, if it's celebrities that you fancy. I know a lot of couples have a sort of, you know, hall pass system, don't they? They have the celebrity fantasy list, you know, so if such and such a person was available, you know, it'd be all right. You could sleep with them. And it's quite fun to have those kind of discussions, because you usually feel fairly confident that it's not going to happen in real life. Although actually I do know a gay man who did get the opportunity to sleep with a very famous film star, who I won't name because he's definitely not gay, right? Definitely not gay. Yeah, he said no, because he didn't think that he would have have a pass for that one, whereas his boyfriend said he could have slept with him. It's like, oh no, I missed out there. But yeah, I do think that it's a whole interesting area to just think about, and sort of it sort of opened my mind. Even if I haven't sort of opened my relationship to other partners, it's opened my mind about the way that I talk about sex. And I think monogamy is full of a lot of assumptions. So now monogamy is more of an active choice rather than something that I think is a cultural default. So I think there's a difference there in how we can approach monogamy and feel more comfortable in it and communicate around it.
I really like the way you've explained that. I really like the way you think of that. Like your outlook a lot. We'll just go with the guests and we'll go for wine, and we can chat about it a bit more. Listen, one of the random things, and this is where I say I'm asking for a friend. How do you keep your sense of humour with online dating nowadays? Any top tips?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a weird old world, isn't it? It's the Wild West out there. Yeah, I think, yeah, drink lots of wine. No, I mean, have friends that you talk to about your experiences, and yeah, do sort of let people know what you're up to, because sometimes you don't know who you're meeting up with. I mean, I ended up getting a lift to a festival the other day from a guy, and I sort of he was like, just so you feel safe, take a photo of my number plate, take a photo of me, send it all to a friend, this is my name, this is who I am. But I needed to get to this festival, and I was in the middle of nowhere, and so I wouldn't normally get in a car with a random man, but I did. And the funny thing about it was that in this photo he couldn't have looked more like a psychopathic serial killer. He really put on his psychopath serial killer face. But yeah, do sort of let people know what you're doing, where you are. So I think that you do need to sort of be safe, because there may be people who are not who they say they are. Certainly I've chatted on a lot of lesbian dating sites and found myself chatting to men who are sort of pretending to be gay women. I don't quite know what their ultimate plan is. But yeah, it's a strange old world. I was on one of these sort of older when it was websites rather than apps, that sends you your own profile back to you. And what was really weird was it had calculated that I was a 73% match. Which I just thought was odd, not to even be 100% for yourself. There's obviously things that you can find fault with even in yourself.
Yeah. It is, my friend says, it's fascinating how people move on at different speeds after the breakups, how people feel they need to get themselves on these websites. They have some sort of pressure driving them. Is it part of a recovery and they want to show their friends that they're getting better, and by talking about it they can kind of reassure friends that they're doing okay, whereas actually sometimes I feel maybe they might not be? Or are these things too easy sometimes, and people will jump into relationships which might be the repetition of a previously unhealthy relationship? I mean, yeah. You're the only person who can police yourself.
It's so hard, isn't it? Rebound relationships are really interesting, and something I have talked about a lot myself, because it feels like all these people are open to you, all these choices, and there is this sort of paradox of choice, that there's so many choices we can never actually feel happy with one. If ordering up a new lover is as simple as ordering a pizza. And of course human relationships are way more complicated than that, and we can definitely rush into things before we're ready, because we want to feel desired. I think our ego is bruised, our sense of self is really crushed for some time, and I think being desired, being fancied, can feel like a big part of the healing process. But I suppose it's important to be honest with yourself, be honest with the people that you're meeting and dating about what it is that you're looking for, and that you might want to take things really slowly, and that you are hurting. And yeah, after my big breakup, I did get into a relationship too quickly, and I tried to communicate about the fact that I needed to take it slowly, but then sort of ended up getting sort of into something fairly quickly anyway, because I think it can be quite compelling like that. But yeah, do really take your time and sort of be honest with yourself. But yeah, obviously you do want to feel desired again. So there are lots of interesting books that I've read about women who sort of go and have lots of sexual adventures after a big divorce or a big breakup. And I'm trying to think, what was the one that there's a really great one, and there's an American woman called Laura, and I can't think of her book title for just for the moment, but I will find it before the end of the session. And yeah, it's really great. And I just think we can go on this voyage of discovery that we've not been on. Maybe we've just been with one partner for a long time, so it can be a really important journey, but one that we need to sort of take some time with. I think practice some self-care, and actually reaching out to your platonic friends and maybe forming new platonic relationships, new friendships, going and doing interesting new activities might be just as useful, in addition to having a little look on the dating sites just to see what's out there.
And you never know who you're going to bump into in the frozen food section of Waitrose, do you?
That's very true.
Have to lose that. Now, one of the things I've noticed as a practitioner over the quite a few years I've been doing this has been the rise of what we call divorce coaches. So specialist trained counsellors who will take on clients to help guide them through the divorce process, but only through the divorce process. So they might only have 6 sessions or 8 sessions, and they won't do any aftercare, if that makes sense. They are literally there as a support, I suppose, an emergency service. There's one wonderful divorce coach I know who takes quite a firm approach with her clients, and if she thinks you haven't left the house for a few days, she'll turn up on your doorstep, make you put some makeup on, and force you to leave the house, which works for a lot of people. There wasn't that years ago, and as lawyers we don't have the training, we can't be counsellors, and would be a very expensive therapy service. You don't want to be relying on your lawyer. You do need your support network, you need your platonic friends, but some of them frequently will say what they think you want to hear. Tough love's hard coming from friends, isn't it? So I do really like the rise of the divorce coaches, especially the ones that help with the co-parenting. They will see you after divorce and help you with kind of blended families and things like that, and what have you. That's absolutely fascinating, and that's really valuable for us as lawyers. And
so many podcasts now. I've guested on some really interesting ones, but people like the Divorce Goddess, Tosh Britton, is really lovely. But it just made me think the idea of co-parenting. There's a lovely episode of my podcast with the comedian Jess Fostekew, where she talked about the journey she went on when she separated from the father of her child, when she suddenly fell in love with a woman and sort of went through this big change in how she sort of perceived her own identity and sexuality. And she sort of talked about, having the difficult discussion with her partner, and saying that, the fact that they were separating was not up for negotiation, but everything about how that played out was, she absolutely wanted to give him a sense of agency, give him some sense of collaboration in how the separation was going to play out, and in how they would live, where they would live, how they would co-parent, all that kind of practical stuff. I do think, I joke about when I got dumped by email, but it did feel like my agency had been taken away and someone had made the decision for me without any discussion or negotiation. And so I do think if you're the person who's leaving and you want to deliver the bad news, sort of giving the other person some sense of agency and power is helpful, because I think that's when we can really feel at our absolute worst, is if all of that is taken away.
I did notice actually your dog is heckling you in the background with a squeaky toy.
Oh yes, sorry about that. Yes, she's half beagle actually, so she's naughty as well.
Oh, right, okay. Well, I have a huge amount of sympathy. Arthur's just taken my socks and left the office, so you know. Lovely. I think I can see Sally kind of adding some names into the chat box there for some people that we know.
Yeah, brilliant.
You know, just like lawyers, pick up the phone, talk to these people. Don't pay any money until you find somebody you're happy with. You know, it's a big deal. You are introducing another stranger into your life, and got to be the right one. And if you introduce them into your life and after a period of time it doesn't feel the right one, bin them. Not a problem. They're not the only person there. I will gel with some people, and other people I won't gel with. It's not a problem. We'll always find the right person. Right, now, I'm not ignoring the chat regarding bigamy and the deficiencies in the law, by the way, on the chit chat. It is possibly a subject for another podcast that one we could do. We could make a whole a webinar out of that sort of area, but probably not tonight, if that's okay. Now, right, interesting. Last question, if you can see it, Rosie, is about the main differences we see when someone gets divorced, when someone's so narcissistic personality disorder or coercive control compared to a normal breakup. Well, I mean, it just sums up really the question to a certain degree. The differences between the two types of breakup are absolutely phenomenal. If somebody's got NPD or engages in coercive and controlling behaviour, then frequently you can't have a normal breakup, because the narrative is determined by them.
Yeah, sadly so. I mean, also, I wonder what is a normal breakup? I mean, is there a normal anything? Is there a normal relationship? But I know what you mean. Obviously, unfortunately, some of us get involved with people who are controlling, and yes, they won't give us that agency in the breakup. Again, one podcast and an episode of my podcast and the corresponding book I would recommend is the episode that I did with Rebecca Humphreys, who she's an actor, and she talked about when her partner was photographed cheating when he was on Strictly Come Dancing. So it was quite a big story, and she did a tweet where she reclaimed her narrative, and then she's written a book as well. I think it's called Why Did You Stay? I think. And yeah, so that's a really powerful book where she sort of unpicks how there'd been a lot of controlling behaviour in this relationship. But yeah, obviously when you're swept up in it all and the excitement of falling in love, you don't see what's going on, and then you realise that you've been in this relationship and sort of jettisoned huge parts of you. And she spoke very eloquently on my podcast earlier this year about that. We did a live episode over in East London, and so that's available if you wanted to listen to that.
That's great. I will actually check that one out. Going back to the MPD, if anyone is interested, there's a lady that we talk to and use frequently here called Dr. Sapriya McKenna, thelifedoctor.org, who specialises in helping people divorce narcissists. Narcissism isn't a personality disorder that's recognised by the English courts. We can't waltz into court and say, well, they're a narcissist, so we should get all the money, or that they're a narcissist and that's why everyone's, the costs are so high because someone's behaving so badly, or what have you. It's a really, really difficult one. And actually, when we do talk about narcissism on things like this these webinars, what have you, they are some of the most popular ones. It is just a really, really tricky subject. But if I can help you, do your research, look at Sapriya McKenna's top tips, really. Cut off the fuel that you're giving the narcissist by responding to what they're doing, and find your own path if you can, and try and find a lawyer that's kind of been there and done that before and help people through it, if you can. Not easy. Everybody who's in that situation has huge sympathy from me. There we go. Thank you, Sally. I've just seen you put the details on the chat. That's awesome. I think we're done for questions. Wow.
Oh, really interesting.
6:29. Good God, you can come again.
Yay.
A seasoned performer, obviously. Wonderful. All right. Rosie, I really enjoyed our chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been lovely to join you.
I'd love to have you back again. Kate's obviously not with us tonight. So I'll go rogue and say you're coming back at some point anyway. I do have
just having a look at some of the chat. It's it's so interesting. Brilliant.
It is. I do love doing these webinars. Now, what are you writing next?
Oh, well, I am I'm sort of working on a few things, slightly tentatively at the moment, because the publishing industry is a bit weird in the way it works. But I have started writing a novel, which is about sort of complicated relationships within the comedy industry, which I'm quite enjoying. So we'll see what happens with that. But my agent is pitching out. I want to write a book about friendships and how it's quite difficult to make friendships as an adult, and how, you know, friendship breakups, which I also write about in my book, can, well, hurt just as much as romantic breakups. And we don't have the same sort of language and socially recognised and sanctioned ways of recovering from those. So yes, that there may be something about friendships. I'm also toying with something I'm writing about crushes and unrequited love as well, which is another topic that fascinates me. But there's going to be a few things coming, hopefully. But for now, I've got a few more live dates of the Breakup Monologues to round up this current season. So if people are in London, we're going to be at the Bill Murray, which is a fabulous comedy pub venue in Angel in Islington. We're going to be there on the 24th of September that's on a Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock, with some really fantastic guests, Ria Lena and James Barr and Jambi McGrath. So that's going to be really great. So I'd love to see some people at that one.
That would be great. I'll tell my team, but you might find a load of divorce lawyers on the front row. Is that okay?
No, that'll be great. I mean, it's interesting. One time we had a lot of relationship therapists on the front row making notes, and I thought that's a worry.
I love that. That's really cool. I really like that. Rosie, I've really enjoyed this evening. Thank you very much. It's been delightful.
Thank you so much.
Right, everybody, have a lovely evening. I'm going to go off and pour a glass of wine, because that's what we do after our webinars on a Wednesday night. And I'll see you all again soon. But thank you very much. Really loved tonight, Rosie. Really did. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really fun.
Thank
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.